is A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood from 2019, starring Tom Hanks, of course, Matthew Rhys, Chris Cooper, directed by Meryl Heller. Quick logline: Lloyd Vogel, a cynical journalist, gets acquainted with the kind hearted television presenter Fred Rogers while writing an article on him. With time, the two strike an unlikely friendship. So, yeah, what I was going to say was that it's interesting to see Tom Hanks's like later life career, which is what we're in. Like he's done a lot of real people, a lot of accents, from like Sully to Captain Phillips to Fred Rogers to the Elvis dude, whatever his name
Oh yeah,
was.
Colonel Parker. I forgot
Colonel
about
Parker.
that.
Yeah, I almost put that movie, but then I was like, oh,
Oh, I love that movie and that performance.
movie
That
is
maybe
very
that'll be
good.
another episode.
Movie's entertaining, but not him. Tom Hanks is probably the weakest part of that in my mind. So he's done a lot of these movies, and I don't know. I started to question a little bit. Like Sully is very good, Captain Phillips is very good, but Ben Bradley in The Post, and a lot of these are kind of hammy, sort of. I'm putting on an accent, but it just feels like it's Tom Hanks, pretending to be somebody else. So I've been a little bit honestly like uneven on Tom in his kind of later life career, but I wanted to highlight one performance in there which is a real person, which I think works, and it shouldn't work because it has the potential of being too on the nose, right? Because you think of Fred Rogers,
Yeah,
nobody can be Fred Rogers, obviously, because it's like a singular person. But then you think of, okay, who could play that person? Anybody who knows Fred Rogers, if you ask that person on the street, they would probably say Tom Hanks, because Tom Hanks has sort of similar likability, America's dad, like you said, those sort of qualities. But at the same time, the thing that we've been saying all along, Tom does have an alertness and an intelligence to him and a sharpness to him. He is an actor. It could be too on the nose that it feels like a caricature. This could go really wrong. And I remember watching the movie and really quite liking it, especially his performance, and rewatching it since it came out. It was reaffirmed to me that this might be his most restrained performance. It's not something I've seen him do much of. Like he can be relatable, but he's not the quiet guy in the room. Even as Forrest Gump, he doesn't say a lot, but when he says, he's pretty loud. Like you
right.
can't miss what Tom has to say. But this is a quiet performance. And even though when it starts and the song of the Fred Rogers show comes up and it's Tom Hanks, changing the coat to the sweater, and for a second it is Tom Hanks, but then I'm very curious to get your thoughts. I totally forgot it was Tom Hanks. Now, I wasn't thinking that, oh, is this Fred Rogers or no? Because I'm not interested in that. Like how much a person looks like the person they're
Right.
playing, like that's a cheap biopic, trope. It's more about communicating the essence of this person, but also humanizing it. And I think that's what Tom does in this movie. That, yeah, you're getting those qualities of likability and relatability that Tom has, his persona has, obviously Fred Rogers has. But then you're also getting a little bit of a mysterious sort of thing behind this person, because it is kind of outlandish that someone like Fred Rogers existed.
Uh-huh.
How could that be? And not that this is an expose, haha, no, there were bad things in the
Right.
closet, but you do see something a little bit more complicated, where there are skeletons in the closet in terms of his relationships with his kids or his wife, or how people, even the people he works with, and how they sort of look at him, they revere him, but it's not all, cakes and roses or
Right.
peaches, whatever the metaphor is. It's complicated. And Fred is, in a way, you could argue, at least as put it in the movie, in these interviews with Vogel, is kind of in denial often, like doesn't answer any real questions,
Right.
puts it back on him. Now you could argue that that's his genius, that he wants to put everybody who's coming in contact with him as the subject to help them in some way, but it could also be a thing of just him avoiding whatever he's dealing with himself. So I think it's a pretty brilliant performance, which could have gone really wrong. I'll talk more about the movie later, but yeah, curious if you'd seen this before and what were your thoughts on Tom.
Yeah, I'd never seen this actually, so it was interesting to see the movie, and I think I was surprised actually in how much Tom worked because, like you said, it's sort of yeah obvious. Okay, Tom Hanks, Fred Rogers. okay, I can kind of picture this in my head, like, okay, whatever. But it really didn't feel like he was like playing a caricature of
It's
a
not an
real life person.
impression.
It was interesting. I was reminded a lot of this when I was watching this of his performance as Walt Disney in Saving Mr. Banks.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that. Yeah.
Obviously it's Tom Hanks playing Walt Disney, and that movie or his performance in that movie does sometimes veer into that like he's playing a character and
Right.
overly Walt Disney. You don't really feel like it's actually Walt Disney. It's like Tom Hanks playing Walt Disney.
Right.
And this it doesn't feel like that. It
No.
does feel like this is Mr. Rogers that you're watching, even though you know it's Tom Hanks. And like you said, he doesn't look exactly like Fred Rogers,
No.
but he has the essence of at least what I, remember Fred Rogers to be. I watched that show as a kid growing up. I mean, all the time, multiple the beginning of my life, it was, Fred Rogers was always on TV, and I have a lot of fond memories of that show. And obviously, I haven't seen it since I was like 4, probably.
Yeah.
But I felt like I was watching that show again, and it was bringing back all these memories of
Mm,
how important Fred Rogers was to me, and how just incredible that show is, and how special he was as a person. And I got very emotional at the end, just kind of
yeah.
going back to being a 2 and 3 year old watching Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, and all these songs and images and people that I just didn't remember. It was all these suppressed, really good memories. And he was able to bring those back where I never felt like it was a performance, or like they were trying to, like you said, get too much of we're gonna expose who he really was. And there was glimpses of it, and that was what he was able to do very, very carefully show you that first of all he was, at least portraying in this movie, he was what he was like on screen, in
Yeah.
that he was super empathetic. Sometimes I guess to a fault this movie was sort of toying with that, right? He can only care about other people and not really himself, or treats everyone the same, which is great. But if you have children, they should probably be ahead of
Hmm.
people you don't know. And the movie was hinting at those sorts of things. But I think Tom Hanks mesmerized me into being like a 2 year old again, watching Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. They'd be like, oh
I'm
crap,
so
maybe I
glad
should
to
go
hear
back
that.
and watch more of that show. Just is such a special and unique show, and he was such a special and unique guy. Which I'll get into more about the movie, but actually, I'm curious. Did you watch Mr. Rogers? Was it also on
No,
rotation?
I didn't, which is why I'm very happy to hear that it evoked that for you. I didn't even know who Fred Rogers was, but I saw the documentary that came out a
Ah,
few years ago, right before this movie, and that's why I was teed up for watching this movie because that documentary was amazing, and I just sobbed and sobbed just watching that, and then watched some of more stuff of Fred Rogers, and I was like, my gosh, how has this person existed?
so the film didn't really work for me overall. So it's definitely not, like you said, a straight ahead biopic. It's not.
Mhm.
It's a story of a journalist and not a story of Fred. It's not a cradle to grave kind of thing. But it wasn't necessarily that angle that was work fully for me. It was the surreal aspect of this movie. They do a lot of, oh, now the main character, this journalist, is like shrunken and he's on the set, or he's seen visions of the different puppets. And that piece of it just didn't really work for me. And the overall framing device, like we keep cutting to, the New York City, but instead of actually New York, it's as if it was part of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. I don't know, for some reason the surreal pieces
Mm.
kind of got in the way of the heart of the movie to me. Like it was honestly like just those scenes with Fred Rogers and capturing sort of the pace of the show, which is a very quiet,
Right.
slow, but not slow in like a negative way. But there's a certain rhythm to how Fred Rogers talked and how the show was put on. And when it would capture those moments, again was taking me back to being a 2 year old. But the rest of the movie and the way they handled it, I just didn't. I don't know, kind of got in the way for me. Like I wanted more of a traditional narrative with the same, performance by Tom Hanks and the way he was doing it, but I didn't need the rest of that. So yeah, what are your thoughts on just the overall film?
I quite liked it, 'cause especially after that great documentary, it was sort of like, okay, how do what are you going to do? So I was happy that this was
Mm,
not a cradle to grave. In fact, Tom Hanks as Fred Rogers, a supporting character in the movie, is not
right.
the lead in the movie. The movie is not called Fred Rogers' Story or whatever. And I thought having the lens of a cynic was actually obvious, but also clever and entertaining
Yeah,
because it allows you to explore a little more of Fred Rogers. And even though you know it's coming, that Fred will have an amazing impact on this person's life, you know that's coming. But
right.
I think the way it's done is very beautiful. And I do think this friendship has an impact on Fred Rogers too. And
Hmm.
it's shown in a very subtle way, but it is. And I think the juxtaposition of Matthew Riz's relationship with his own father, Chris Cooper, who also is so good in the movie. Everybody's good in the movie, but I'm always happy to see Chris Cooper in
Yeah,
any movie. He's just so good.
yeah,
And I think that juxtaposition with this relationship, I think it's very well done. Like if you were to going to make a movie about Fred Rogers, I think you have to ground it in impact on real people's lives. And I think
agreed.
they do a very good job with that. The surreal elements didn't bother me. I don't know. There's something magical about Fred Rogers' world.
Hmm.
It's not from this world because he himself doesn't feel like from this world. And I think you needed some magic that transitions between the real world, which is Matthew Rizzo's world of cynicism and pain and hurt and all of that, back into Fred Rogers' sort of more idealistic world. And I think those transitions help with that. Otherwise, it would feel, I feel like it'll feel very jarring
Mm.
and it would be a Sorkin movie. But, and then to your point, the pace from Matthew Rizzo's world to Fred Rogers' worlds cuts down by at least 10 times.
Hmm.
It would be very jarring. And I think that, sir, I don't even call it surreal, but sort of just the, as if his show is kind of the real world, it provides a great transition into just
Mm.
slowing things down. And we know we are in this now. And it's almost like his world is kind of pulling Matthew Riz bit by bit and is doing a number on him while he's having all these delusions and is having a hard time in all areas of his life at the same time. So I don't know. It worked on me. Is it a movie that I'm going to go and watch over and over again? Probably not.
Hmm.
I think it still lacks something. I don't know, a punch of some sort, which is kind of a weird thing to say to be expecting from a Fred Rogers movie, because that's not the point. It's a sweet movie, but yeah, there's something lacking about in it that doesn't make it like something that I would watch, repeatedly. It's a little flat, perhaps.
Yeah, I think there is something missing beyond like the surreal stuff not working for me. But I do think the intent I really appreciated. It was the
Yeah.
execution. It's not that perfect. I think it's just the message of how Fred Rogers' teachings. I mean, not to make him sound like a cult leader or something, but his
No,
what he was trying to instill and teach in children is really necessary throughout your entire life. It's not just
totally.
something you need when you're two and then you're outgrown, quote unquote, his lessons and his approach to life and his approach to other human beings. You need to carry that with you through your entire life. You'll just have a richer life. And I did enjoy seeing that the journalist realize that over time, and it helped me also think back to as well, like, oh wow, like I maybe I should just go back and watch some Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood on YouTube or something just to like remind myself of his outlook on life, which I think is not just for kids. It's how people should be living. It's how, rich
Yeah.
relationships are formed. And I think that
Yeah.
I liked that piece of the film for sure. Just the intent was great. The execution wasn't perfect, but I still enjoyed the film, and I was glad I finally saw it. And definitely Tom Hanks just again like made me forget it was Tom Hanks.
Just very hard to do. He also looks very good in the movie, like a very dignified,
He does.
handsome older man. Like he looks really good. Like I haven't seen him look this good in his, any of the movies he's been in lately. So that was also nice. One last thing to say, they very subtly show that it takes work to be Fred Rogers.
Yes.
Like the rituals that he shares, it doesn't come, of course, it comes to him naturally to a very large degree, certainly more than most people, certainly more than me.
Uh-huh.
But it takes work to keep it up. And Fred Rogers also has bad days and down days and what have you. And I think that was very important in the screenplay, but also in the performance, just sort of humanize this person. Otherwise, you lose interest once again. Why are we here?
Exactly. And just again, a life lesson of everyone has bad days and
Right.
everyone has hard things they have to deal with. And there's a scene where he's hitting on the piano and it's like,
Yeah.
yeah, even him who's, I don't know, looked up to him sounds weird when you're two, but he was like a parental figure in a way on the TV. And you never think parental figures have these types of issues. But on the show, I was remembering, yeah, he would talk about, he would be vulnerable himself sometimes as trying to make sure that the kids who were watching it knew that it was okay to do that. Like sharing
Right.
emotions is a good thing and healthy thing, even when adults do it or kids do it. And so I did really appreciate those scenes and that angle that the movie took as well.
Hi there, it's Alex. If you like the review and discussion Karan and I just had, make sure you subscribe to our channel, Movies That Shaped Us, to get full episodes. Every other Wednesday, Karan and I review a new release and then discuss 6 other movies made by that film's actor or director and how they shaped us. Subscribe right now or follow our podcast on Spotify or Apple Podcasts via the link in the description below. Hope you join us for the journey.